everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about watercolor brushes, but before we dive in, I kind of wanted to give you the inspiration behind me making this video. Not only did my patrons and many of you here on the channel ask to see this video, but I was also really inspired last month during World Watercolor Month because I ended up using my water brushes quite a bit to fill out my sketchbook for my painting a day, and I really came to really enjoy using these tools. When I first heard about them, I thought that they were kind of gimmicky or maybe better for brush lettering type of things, but the more and more that I use them for my watercolor sketches, the more I really enjoy them. But before we talk about the pros and cons to watercolor brushes, how to use them and how to care for them, I wanted to go ahead and give you guys some exciting news, and that is that Charlie O'Shields, who is the creator of World Watercolor Month over on Doodlewash, has very kindly offered to feature me in his blog. So be sure after this video to go ahead and click the link in the comments below to go ahead and check out that feature on me. So thank you so much to Charlie for sharing my story with all of his viewers as well as my own, and today at the release of that article I wanted to go ahead and make a special video that was inspired by something he created, which was World Watercolor Month, which really got me into these watercolor brushes. So I hope it all ties together. I know you guys have been waiting for this. Let's go ahead and dive in. So when I first kind of dove into the world of researching watercolor brushes, I was so put off by them because so many artists, when you first get into watercolor, I feel like they just are always saying, you know, use natural hair brushes or really high quality synthetic brushes, and these are not either of those things. They are synthetic nylon brushes that are really inexpensive, very durable, but they're pretty hard. They're not as soft as other watercolor brushes, so I was like, well, why would I want to paint with those? And unfortunately, my suspicions were confirmed when I finally did decide to use watercolor brushes, or water brushes, for the first time. I got this brand here, and I usually try not to say anything too negative here on the channel, but I do have to say that I would not recommend the Artist Trove watercolor brushes. I ordered these on Amazon. They were cheaper than the Pentel Aquashes, so I was like, oh, well, I'll give them a try since I don't know if I'm going to like them. But unfortunately, my suspicions were confirmed because when you try and use these brushes, I don't know if I can show you this, because it's going to drip out on the bottom side of the brush, but the water just completely drips out of the barrel from the black piece, not the brush tip. So when you're painting with these, water just falls out and it causes back runs, and it's completely hard to control, and I didn't enjoy using them at all. So I put these away and I was like, all right, well, I don't like watercolor brushes. And then the more and more I heard about them here on YouTube, I was like, all right, well, maybe I should give the Pentel Aquashes a chance because people talk absolutely so highly of those brushes. And so I finally caved in and bought a couple of the brushes. I didn't buy the set of 3. I only have the small and the large. There's a medium size as well. These brushes are so nice to use. The water control is so much better. The small one does tend to drip water a little bit, but not anywhere near as much as the other ones, and the large one is the one that I use most often when I'm traveling. So first off, I just want to put in a disclaimer here that this is not a review video. This is not a review for Pentel or Artist Trove or anything like that, and it's not even really a brand comparison because I don't have that many to show you. But I did want to do kind of a general guide on watercolor brushes, how I use them personally, and some other tips that I thought might be helpful along the way. So before I dive into the pros and cons of the watercolor brushes in particular, I did want to give you kind of a baseline for my personal preferences of the tools that I use on a regular basis. And I know everyone has different favorites, but hopefully if you have some or one of these at home, you can kind of get an idea of what, in my mind, I'm comparing these watercolor brushes to and the options. My favorite brushes at the moment are the size 8 Escoda Versatile, the size 8 Silver Black Velvet, and the size 12 Princeton Elite brush. And I use them for different things. The Escoda doesn't hold very much water, so I use it for when I want more control. The Silver Black Velvet comes to a beautiful fine point and lets me do a lot of detail work, but it's also nice and soft, so I can fill in larger areas, and it holds a lot of water. And then the Princeton Elite is kind of an all-around workhorse for the larger size, so any of my larger scale paintings I use this for. It can hold a decent amount of water, but still gets fine-tuned and fine-pointed when it needs to be. So that's kind of in my head what I am, you know, the standards for what I paint with normally every single day. Then some other ones that I wanted to show you in terms of just, you know, size differences and things like that is the Pentel Aquash next to some of these little travel brushes. These are the ones that you can turn around and they turn into a full-length handle. So when they're extended, they're quite a bit larger than the Pentel Aquash, but when they're folded up, they're smaller. This is the Escoda Versatile size 6, so it's the same as this brand, but it's just the travel brush variety. It has a pretty wide, heavy barrel, especially for being such a small brush, so it doesn't actually fit in a lot of my travel palettes because it's too wide. And then kind of on the extreme side of really teeny tiny brushes, I just recently got this Rosemary & Co. brush from one of my patrons, Suzanne. Thank you so much for sending this. This is a Rosemary & Co. Natural hair brush, and this one is super, super juicy, holds a ton of water, is really, really beautiful to paint with, and I can't wait to do more with it. However, any of these brushes that I mentioned, whether they're travel or full size, if you were to take them out with you, you would need extra water to paint with, and the water brushes eliminate the need for that. With our larger standard brushes, you have the disadvantage also with traveling and not wanting to damage the tips of your bristles, because anything you put them in, you're going to end up smushing them against something and it can really damage your brushes. The way I got around that when I first started painting is I bought this, and you could easily make one if you have any kind of sewing skills. This is just like a roll-up brush holder, and it has little pockets so you can put your brushes in them. And then the fabric goes way above them, so you're not going to damage your brushes when you're out traveling with them. So you can get something like this, but it is larger, requires some planning ahead and some extra space for it. So let's for now go ahead and put these brushes aside, and we're just going to be talking about the watercolor brushes. Now, when we're talking about these, I'm going to go through some of the advantages and disadvantages, or pros and cons, whatever you want to call them, and these are just factual statements first. I'll get to my opinions later. But just from a factual point of view, these are very compact brushes that have caps on them, so you're not going to be damaging the bristles when you travel because they're capped and ready to go, and you can throw this in your purse or your pocket or a bag and they're not going to get damaged. You can put them just about anywhere, and if you have one of these higher quality ones, they're not going to leak all over everything. I would maybe worry about them with some of the cheaper brands possibly leaking, but as long as these are screwed on tight, they're not going to go anywhere. One of the very obvious advantages of a water brush is that all the water is self-contained, so it stays right here in the barrel. You can fill this up in a water fountain or a sink or whatever. I know some people like to carry a bottle to fill it in, and you can absolutely do that too, but I don't. I never carry extra water. I just find a fountain or a sink or something to go ahead and fill these up with. And aside from needing a paper towel to kind of dab your colors off on when you're cleaning your brush, you really don't need anything else. This is compact, it's ready to go, and it's much smaller. Even though this is a smaller brush, it's smaller than carrying this brush plus whatever container you're going to put your water in. It also has these nylon bristles that I was telling you about, and these are incredibly, incredibly durable. They're very resilient, and they're going to last you a long time if you are taking care of them. So absolutely, the longevity is in its favor. So in kind of the same breath of these being really resilient and durable, which is an advantage, the disadvantage would be that they are much stiffer than a natural hair brush, especially like a squirrel hair brush, where these spring right back in place. You're not going to get these big soft, luscious strokes across your paper or anything like that. Another disadvantage is that these do absolutely require you to learn a different technique with painting them. They're not going to be the same as painting with a traditional brush where you're constantly rinsing off your brush, going back in. You can rinse these off if you want to have a water bucket nearby, but if you're just using the brush itself, you're going to need to be able to know how to clean it out. You're going to need to know how much pressure to apply to the barrel, which isn't much on these Pentels anyway. There's not a whole lot of pressure that goes into squeezing them, but you do need to know what kind of constant pressure to use if you're trying to get especially larger washes done. And that's actually another disadvantage, is that large flat washes are very difficult with the watercolor brushes because there's constantly a different amount of water flowing through here unless you have an incredibly steady hand. The flow will also vary depending on the brand you get. So a Pentel is not going to be the same as a Koi, it's not going to be the same as an Artist Trove or a Niji or whatever other brush that you have. So each type of brush will require learning kind of a different handling technique for them. They're also only available in limited sizes, so as we mentioned, I've got this small tip here and a large tip, and there's one in between, but they don't get too much larger than this one. Some brands have different types of tips, so there's chisel tips or flat washes, things like that, so they're not just round brushes, but there is a lot less availability in these than there are in traditional brushes. And finally, because water is flowing through these all the time, depending on the brand, it might be very, very difficult or even impossible to get a dry brush effect without completely emptying the barrel of the brush. You can use these as dip pens, which a lot of people do. A lot of people who do hand lettering will just empty the barrels and use them, dipping them in ink and then painting with them. And honestly, I think that's how I could salvage these brushes, since I'm probably not going to use them with water in them because they drip everywhere. I could just empty them out and use them as brush pens that I dip. But in terms of the ones that you have with water, you can dry it off really, really well on your paper towel, but as soon as you go back down, the gravity is going to force some water into that brush, and it will be more difficult to get a dry brush effect. So now on to my opinions of these watercolor brushes. Now, I did list a lot of disadvantages, but I actually have to say that the disadvantages I listed aren't really a hindrance for me. Yes, you have to learn a different style with the brush, but I find that that is actually kind of freeing in itself, and I find that I have a lot more freedom mentally as well as kind of physically with my paintings when I paint with watercolor brushes. And what I mean by that is that when I'm using high quality fine art supplies, good paper, good brushes, good paints, I feel this pressure for everything to be perfect. And when I use watercolor brushes, I'm able to kind of step back off of that. I'm able to let my mind kind of wander a little bit more. My style is looser and freer physically with the water coming through the brush all the time. The washes aren't as controlled, which I really kind of like. And I wanted to show you a couple of the pictures to kind of demonstrate that. So I'm going to start with my World Watercolor Month sketchbook. I have a couple in the front here that I wanted to show you. If you look closely at these, I'm going to zoom in for you. The washes that I was able to get in the different like strokes and patterns, they're not perfect. This isn't a perfect drawing, but I was able to just really flow with the water and the paints and put down some beautiful colors on the paper and really create this exciting painting for myself. In this painting, you can see on the back here how the watercolor washes kind of blend together because you're using a water brush. Water's coming out all the time, but it's not so much. Like, it's not like a sopping squirrel hair brush, so you're not going to have puddles of water on your paper. And so one area will start to dry before you get to the next area. And that's actually another point that I wanted to make, is that, in my opinion, using these watercolor brushes really helped me mentally not to overdo certain sketches, because a lot of times if I got this type of a wash with my traditional brushes, I'd want to go over it again, smooth it out, make sure it's really nice and perfect, and I would have more ability to do that because I could go in with dry brushes or wet brushes as needed. But with a watercolor brush, it's wet all the time. So if I go back and touch an area that's already started to dry, I'm going to cause more blooms. So once I put my paint down, I'm done and I move on to something else. And if I want to go over and put another layer on, I can. But for the most part, it lets me really just leave alone certain details and let them kind of speak for themselves and let the watercolors really shine for themselves too. So I really, really enjoy that. And I actually had some comments on this next one during my World Watercolor Month video. It was of a turkey, and I think it might be a little bit light in the picture, but someone commented that they couldn't believe that I got these textures with a watercolor brush, and it really wasn't that difficult. I just went in with one color and moved on to the different areas, and by the time I came back around, this area was dry, and I could layer on more color and go back and forth, and I just found the whole process really, really beautiful, really freeing, and I really enjoyed it. So as I mentioned, one of the things that I love so much about water brushes is that how portable they are and how few materials that I need. So I can go to a coffee house or a restaurant or out with friends or to the zoo with other people. I'm perfectly happy going to the zoo with myself and bringing more supplies, but if I'm with other people, I don't like to slow people down or have too much that I need to fiddle with. So I have my sketchbook, I've got a set of watercolors that I take with me, and I have a water brush along with a napkin or a tissue or whatever, and that is all I need for painting. I have taken these to the zoo with a group of people, and we went out to dinner afterwards. I sketched my pictures during the day while we were at the zoo, and then while we were waiting for our food to arrive, I was able to do this little sketch in my lap, not taking up too much of the table or spreading out or making other people feel uncomfortable or anything like that. And I was just able to kind of work in my own little portable space, and it hardly requires anything. You can kind of see in some of these sketches that they're really, really loose. They're not meant to be detailed, masterful pieces of art. They're just for fun. And I also did some the other day when I was at a vending event. So I've got a little corgi here and an elephant. I was set up and selling and vending, and in between people walking by and customers coming by, I was able to paint this on a tiny little section of my table because the rest of it was filled up with my product that I was trying to sell. So this is just really, really great for me personally when I'm traveling. So there are plenty of videos here on YouTube with comparisons. I know that Steve Mitchell at Mind of Watercolor has one, and Lindsay the Frugal Crafter have one, comparing lots of different brands. So like I mentioned at the top of this video, that's not what this video is going to be. But I did want to show you a little bit, if this is the first watercolor brush video that you are seeing or hearing of them, just kind of an idea of how they work. So what you do is you apply a little bit of pressure to the barrel of the paintbrush, and you apply it to your paint, and you can just keep squeezing until you have the consistency that you want from your paint that you're using. And then you can apply it straight to your paper, and you will get a feel for this. And I do think that out of the ones that I've used, the Pentel Aquash is the easiest to kind of control. You can do flat washes or graded washes by not applying more paint and just kind of fading out to a white background. And then to switch colors, all you have to do is apply a little bit more pressure onto your napkin, squeeze until the water comes out clear, and then you can go into a different color. Now, I did think it was kind of funny. You can kind of see on my burnt umber here and over here on my ultramarine that this particular brush, I probably would cry if I did this with my really expensive brushes, but I can wiggle this around like it's carving out a little hole in my paints, and that's how I use my water brushes with at least this common set that clearly has some other brands in here now. And then you can get the straight color straight from the pan. It's a much more intense, vibrant color than if I were to mix it with a bunch of water, and you can really get a variety of different consistencies. If I want it to be weaker, I can keep squeezing the water, and eventually I will get a nice clear or graded wash depending on what I'm looking for. When you are done with your brush for a given session, you can just squeeze out the color so that it doesn't surprise you next time you're using it. The bristles will stain because they're nylon, but that's not a problem. They're not going to rub off on anything else that you have. And then you can just simply cap back up your watercolor brush and be on your way again. Now I do want to talk about a couple of things or problems that could happen with your watercolor brushes, and I actually just encountered this the other day at my event that I told you about where I drew the corgi and the elephant, and that is that I had this little Koi Sakura travel brush in this Winsor Newton palette. I modified it so that I could fit it into this section here, so that's the one that I actually travel with most conveniently, but I haven't used it in a long time because I prefer these ones. And when I went to go use it, no matter how hard I squeezed the tube of this water brush, no water was coming out, and I was like, all right, well, I don't really know what to do. I put it away for the time being, but then came back home and researched it a little bit later, and I actually figured out how to fix this. So, one more little note is that the Pentel Aquashes are righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, like most things are. The Koi and the Artist Trove are opposites, so I always end up turning it the wrong way and tightening it instead of loosening it. So I'm going to go ahead and take off this water barrel, and I'm going to set it aside so it doesn't tip over. But I wanted to show you the kind of inner workings of the brush part, and if your water brush isn't working, what a possible solution could be. I'm going to move this out of the way just so that we have a nice clear look at everything. So when you look at the tip of a watercolor brush, this black part here is actually, the horizontal band is a sponge, which I accidentally tore on this one. I'll show you how in a minute, but that would normally go all the way around. And then there's a piece of black plastic that holds the bristles. There's the bristles themselves, and then there's also a water regulator at the bottom there. So all of these pieces can actually come apart, and I want to put a big disclaimer here that if you're going to take apart your own brush, you're doing it at your own risk, and I'm just simply going to show you what I did to fix my own watercolor brush, though there was some damage, so I want to put that big disclaimer so you're taking it into your own hands if you do that. So what I did is, after I researched how to do this, it has to do with the water regulator in here. But how you can take it apart is I grab hold of the black part of the bristle. I'm not pushing the bristles themselves, but I'm pushing the black piece into the barrel and then carefully kind of nudging it down so that I can get this whole piece out of the plastic casing. And with the koi brush, this was really, really easy to do. I tried it with a pentel, and I'll show you that in a second. That one was much more difficult. But I was able to take out this. The sponge is supposed to come with it. It should be wrapped around there for you already. So it would normally be found wrapped around this piece like that, and it would slide on like a cuff. But I'm going to set that to the side for just a moment. So then you are left with this black barrel with your bristles, and the bristles go all the way down to the bottom, and then this end cap regulator comes off. Okay? So these two pieces come apart, and you can rinse out your brush that way. So if you have a really dirty brush and really want to remove it, you can clean your brush in that way. That would be a really, really thorough clean, though. You certainly don't need to do that to get your brushes clean. I never have before today. And then you can carefully slide it back in, making sure all the bristles are back at the tip, and you would be ready to go with that piece. Now inside this regulator, hopefully it'll focus for you, there's a little white piece of plastic. It's really important that you don't lose this or your brush is not going to work anymore, but I will show you what it looks like. It looks like this. So the problem comes when this white piece comes out of the regulator, because what it's doing is it's stopping flow to the bristles. So you want to make sure that white piece is pushed all the way into the black mechanism. So right now it is flush with the top of the regulator, and then I can go ahead and push that back on to my brush, put it back in the little holder for it, making sure I don't hurt the bristles at all. And then I can gently pull my brush back through the tip here. Oh, guess what I forgot? The sponge. You wouldn't have to worry about this part because it would still be on your piece if it didn't break off. I broke it when I first opened this up, so there is some risk with that. The sponge helps keep water inside this piece rather than falling straight out. So anyway, now I have this regulator that is flush with the black part, and if you want to, if you're still having issues, you can go ahead and push that all the way in with any kind of pointed object. I just went ahead and pushed that right in through the opening so that it is up against your watercolor brush. And then I screw back on the cap, and we've got water coming out of it. So I was really glad to find that little trick and that I didn't have to buy a new brush for that. And let me see if I can actually show you if I break it and make it not work again. That way you can see the difference. So what I did is, here's the white piece that's coming up out of the regulator. Do you see how high it is there? And if I were to open my brush in to see that, I would also notice that there's no water coming out of it. It's pretty dry. There's a little bit of moisture in the tip, but I can't squeeze it and have water pour out of it. So I'm going to go ahead, open that back up one more time, take a pin. You don't have to open up the whole thing to do this. You can just take a pin or anything pokey, push that back down where it's supposed to be. And now you have a brush that will let out water. I did do that with the Aquash, but it was more difficult, so I just want to show you. You're going to get a little resistance, and I would urge you to be very careful with any brush that you're using. But this one, when you push on it, it doesn't want to go down very easily. So I'm just going to carefully keep trying to work it down. And you can see in this one, the regulator is not actually attached to the barrel, and that was true in the other one too. So the reason it's harder to get out is because it's pushing against a piece that's not connected to it. So you could try using tweezers or whatever works, just to make sure you're not damaging the plastic. I think for the other one I just kept pushing and it eventually worked. There we go, got the little seal to pop there. So this one also has the little regulator. It's got the same barrel, and it's got a little sponge that's already wrapped around the barrel that shouldn't come off. Now, if you wanted to go ahead and clean out the bristles, I haven't cleaned this one out. This is the one I use most often, and it's not too bad. There's no pigment or anything stuck in there, but I can go ahead, rinse that. I'm just swishing it around in a cup of water. Can rinse that out, can put it back in, making sure the bristles don't get smushed or anything like that. And then we are ready to go once again. Now this one, the piece without the regulator goes in first. I'm just going to go ahead and drop that back in carefully, as flat as I can make it. I didn't push it all the way down yet, but when you screw on the barrel of your brush, it will tighten itself back up to where it's supposed to be, and then you will have a brush that is nice and clean and has some nice water output. I do like it because even though I was pressing pretty hard, a ton of water is not pouring out of this brush, which makes it a lot easier to paint with. So I hope that this video was helpful for you. If you're a beginner and have never used watercolor brushes before, I hope that it helped introduce them just a little bit and what you might use them for versus using traditional brushes for. If you already are familiar with watercolor brushes, I hope that the tip about the water regulator maybe can help restore any of your brushes that you thought were goners. And in general, just join the conversation below in the comments. Let me know what you like using your watercolor brushes for. Be sure to check out Doodlewash for that feature, and thank you so much to Charlie for going ahead and sharing that story with everyone. Be sure to give Charlie's blog some love. It is great and has some wonderful resources on it. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank all of you for liking, commenting, and sharing this video, and to my patrons for helping to support the content of these videos, and I will see you next time.